Hi, so my name is Delphine Labbe, and I'm gonna talk about a research project that I've been conducted in British Columbia when I was as part of my affiliation with the University of British Columbia. And this project is in collaboration with the University of Tasmania and the Society Stroke Recovery Association of BC and March of Dimes Canada. So the aim of the presentation is really to discuss the benefits and challenges of using the World Cafe approach that we use in the context of stroke recovery. So I'll present a little bit the context and introduction of the project, present the approach of the World Cafe, discuss the benefits and challenges, and talk a little bit about our next steps. So stroke is among the 10th leading cause of disability in Canada, and it really has long-term effects on the well-being and the health of the person, the stroke survivor, but also their families. And those long-term effects are currently not fully addressed in the healthcare system in Canada. The healthcare system is really mostly focusing on the acute part of stroke. However, there's in the community different types of services and programs that are offered to support the stroke survivors, but they're often not aware of those services. So really that creates kind of a gap or a hole when the person leaves the hospital where they don't necessarily know how to address their different new needs related to their new situation. So there's really a need to better understand how to bridge programs to improve community integration of stroke survivors. And for that, we developed a project called the World Cafe Community Conversation of Stroke. That was a community university partnership conducted in British Columbia and facilitated by our community partner, the Stroke Recovery Association of BC and March of Dimes Canada. As part of their after stroke strategy, they really wanted to know what were the needs of stroke survivors and how they could offer services or improve the community reintegration of that community. And so the aim of our project was to bring stakeholders together to discuss and develop a greater understanding of community-based stroke recovery needs in diverse communities. And the other aim we had was also through those discussions to help create networking opportunities and starting to build those bridge between different sectors that were having an impact on the life of the stroke survivors. So in order to create that discussion and those network analysis, we used an approach called the World Cafe. So what is the World Cafe? So that's a participatory approach that has been used to allow the exploration of different topics and issues from the perspective of multiple stakeholders. So it really has that goal of bringing people from different perspectives to discuss together. It's also an approach that's been shown to allow to capture the lived experience of the participants and their needs, because it's really their own voice and giving voice to also population who often not necessarily have a place where they can be heard. And it's recognized as an efficient method to generate and strengthen collaborative networks. And how does that work for a World Cafe? So there's different design principles that are listed in the literature. First, the importance of clarifying the context. So when you do a World Cafe, it's to answer probably a specific question or bring people to talk about a specific topic, context. It has to be clearly identified when people come to participate in that World Cafe. There's also this really important aspect of creating an hospitable environment, which is really look like a comfortable cafe-like setting. Often it would say that you would use small tables with tablecloths and really create that kind of informal discussion that you would find in a coffee place. And the importance of exploring questions that matter to the group. Also to encourage everyone's contribution. I'll talk a little bit of more of how we did it for our specific project, but often the idea is to have a small group discussion and large group discussion. So it really encouraged everyone to share their experience and their knowledge. It really, the goal is often to identify common perceptions and priorities. So yes, to exchange on maybe different, on different perspective, but mostly trying to find those commonalities. And finally, it's also built on the principle that it would build collaboration and create those links between participants. So for our World Cafe, we targeted or worked with 3 communities who had different challenges regarding stroke recovery. And those communities were identified by our community partners as also a place where program and services were maybe less present. So we had a rural community, an urban and multicultural community, and an indigenous community, which was also located in a remote area on the island of Vancouver, on Vancouver Island. And our World Cafe were facilitated by the members of the research team, where are constituted of both the researcher and the community partners. And it followed the same process in the 3 communities. So they start with informal lunch or activity. So people can just gather 1 hour before the beginning of the World Cafe, so they could have time to just chat, introduce themselves to others, talk maybe to some people they already know, but just like really to create that informal ambience that would hopefully trigger the conversation and the discussion. And then we introduce ourselves as expert in stroke rehabilitation and researcher in the community and community partners, but mostly it was important for us to really tell the participants that we were facilitators for the discussion. And then that was our main role was there. We were there to just encourage exchanges and making sure that we were reflecting and providing the feedback that that was emerging from the discussion. And then the World Cafe followed the same process where we asked 1 question and then people discussed in small group first. And then after 20-minute period, they would come back and share with the larger group what they had discussed in their small group. And we repeat that process for each questions that I'm going to present just on the next slide. And after the second question, the people in the tables changed. So it really allowed as well everybody to sit with other people and to have other perspective. And at the end, we prepared a key summary of all that has been discussed in the 4 questions that we presented live to the participants. So they provided feedback and they tell us like what was important. So we had that kind of member checking during the World Cafe itself. And during the discussion in small groups, there was no taker, and the main points of the large group discussion were also projected on a PowerPoint presentation. So what did we discuss about? So we asked the people who were present, the actors and the important stakeholders, about what people with stroke would need in their community. What were the current gaps in support? And what would be needed to improve support in their community, and how as a group and as researcher and at that collaboration or as a network we could move forward, and what we would like to see in the immediate future. So the 3rd question was more about the long-term goal or the long-term needs, but the last one was really, okay, we're here now, what can we do to move that further? So really with that idea of maybe sustaining that network that was created during that World Cafe. So who came to discuss in our groups? We had a variety of stakeholders. It was something we targeted, and it's a challenges that I'm going to talk about, but we really wanted to have representative of every important groups involved in stroke recovery. So so in the rural group, we mostly had rehabilitation professional and community-based organization staff, but we also had stroke survivor and caregivers. In the urban and multicultural group, we had more stroke survivors and also rehabilitation professional, but also community-based organization and municipal staff. Any smaller group of indigenous, we had only one stroke survivor and one caregiver, but we had 5 community-based organization staff, which include an indigenous liaison nurse. So that was the people who came to talk about those 4 questions that I presented. So like I mentioned, I'm not going to present the results, what came out of those discussions. We have a paper that is in process right now about those results, but for that presentation, I really wanted to talk about what were the benefits of the approach, why did we choose the approach, and how well it worked. So for us, the World Cafe really allowed us for enough flexibility to adapt and respect each of the context specificity and to involve the stakeholders. So for example, I think this is one of the clearer one, is with the indigenous community. When we were preparing and talking with the community, they told us the importance of having a circle agreement before starting the discussion, because this is a process that most tribe in that area are using when they have a discussion, to make sure that there's rules that are put in place of who's gonna talk and how to be respectful to each other. And also the informal activity was a welcoming dance offered by the tribes. And it was important for them to share their culture and their experience to us before we could start discussing about their needs. So that World Cafe really allowed that flexibility. And for the urban and multicultural, we had live translators that support that discussion. So they could, the people from Chinese background were able to share with the rest of the group, but with their own language, and then a translator would share with the rest of the group. Also, we felt that the World Cafe really facilitate contribution from all people, taking into consideration the power dynamics that often exist between healthcare professional, the stroke survivors, or the community base. And we really felt also by changing people where they were sitting and with who they were sitting, that every voices was more heard with that, with the use of the World Cafe. And it was particularly important for the indigenous, but also for the migrant communities who are not often heard. Also, we found that the fact that the World Cafe is really looking at identifying common needs, we were able to look at those common needs and those commonalities, but also it was specific enough, and it led the space to talk about specific challenges and solutions to the community. So for example, in the rural, they identify more that there was youth gap in services, even for high functioning stroke survivors, and that the service or program should focus on goal planning and identification of priority. In the urban multicultural, it was more about how some specialized programs that are already offered in their community were only in English, and only in few communities, and that it would be important to provide information in other languages. And in the indigenous community, really the challenges was that lack of trust in healthcare, and how to address that was to the importance of building relationship and creating trust with the community, involving working with the elders. And also, as the aim was creating networks and collaboration, it was beneficial because different in the 3 communities, those bridges were slowly built. As for example, in the rural, the hospital staff welcomed SRABC to provide space for resources. So that bridge between the community and the hospital was slowly being built, and that was leading directly from the World Cafe. In the urban multicultural, there was connection of 2 speech pathologists with the regional coordinator of SRABC to expand services, and especially to have information for people with aphasia, and also the importance of having other language involved, offered on the website of SRABC. And in the indigenous, the SRABC reached out to 3 participants to become volunteer and being involved in the community integration of stroke survivor. And also there was a development of connection, as at least 5 participants agreed to meet in the near future. But there was also some challenges. The World Cafe asked for careful planning. Also, there's an importance of the knowledge of the community to increase the outreach. We had difficulty with the indigenous community to recruit them. We had some regional coordinator that knew a lot of people in the community, but she left, and then it was harder to be able to reach everybody that could be part of it. It was time and resource consuming to be sure that we had a representativity of the variety of the point of view and of the stakeholders. And it was a lot of the coordinator, the community partner that worked hard on that. And the sustainability of stakeholder engagements surely needs ongoing work. And it's important that we don't lose that momentum that we gain with that World Cafe. So I think the World Cafe really highlighted the importance of community consultation and collaboration from the beginning to identify and co-design solutions that really represent and answer the needs of a community. And following the World Cafe and the identification of some needs and solution proposed, we are currently in the development of an intervention project with one of the communities to address the needs identified in the World Cafe. And hopefully we'll then apply those to the other communities as well. So thank you very much for your time. Have a good rest of the day.